Hello, everyone. Today we will talk about historical accuracy in games. Is it something that can help people learn history in an engaging way, or is it just for fun? It's a question that has been asked many times, and there's no definitive answer for it. Wart and me, Dante, are two history students who both enjoy video games. In this video, we will start from the question if games need to be historically accurate or not. We will do this by giving an example of some different historical games in different genres. The games we have chosen for this video are Assassin's Creed Odyssey, Battlefield 1, Europa Universalis 4, and also an indie game, Holdfast, which are all games which we have played. Every genre handles different history in a different way, and this gives us an opportunity to give different views of how history can be used in video games. It can also get us to the question if it's necessary for games to be historically accurate, on which we will give some pros and some cons. Then we will also, at the end, let the non-historian Sandro give his views on historical accuracy in games based on questions that we will ask him later.
Okay, so first of all, I will start out talking about Assassin's Creed Odyssey. So in Assassin's Creed Odyssey, the storyline is set, as in all the other games from the series, in a historical background. Although the series has been less historically accurate with newer releases, the series still takes pride in extensive research and is still one of the most well-known games that tries to let the player relive the past. The main storyline of the series is, however, not based upon reality at all. There are two organizations, Templars and Assassins, though named differently in this game since we are quite a few hundred years removed from the foundation of the Templar Order. These two organizations fight over artifacts and technologies from another more highly developed civilization that lived hundreds of years before the story takes place. The historical part of the game is just hardly present in the main storyline. It is, however, represented in the historical places, events, and people that you can find in the game. To achieve a high level of historical accuracy, Ubisoft, the game development studio, has a historian employed full-time and often consults experts. From a didactic point of view, the game is probably not the best way to learn about historical events or people. The Peloponnesian War, for example, merely serves as a background against which the story is set, and the player doesn't really get to know much about the war itself. The same goes for the historical people. You can meet these, but they offer only trivial side quests that aren't that much connected to events we know these people took part in. For example, the Athenian general Alcibiades might just ask you to bring him some flowers for his lover, but that doesn't tell you anything about who Alcibiades was. The value of the game lies just more in giving the player the option to explore the Greek world in a very similar way to what it would have looked like in the 5th century BC.
When you look at Odyssey for a historical overview, you cannot look past their Discovery Tour, which gives you the opportunity to learn more from the period in a guided way. It mostly gives information about the archaeological side of the period, with more focus about the buildings and less about specific events in these times. This makes it perfect for use at school, but does still lack as an interactive way to get to know the history of the Peloponnesian War in this more a virtual museum in which you can run around without actually playing an active part in it. It is all put in different categories which you can choose from, like politics and philosophy, arts and religion. And it's an easy way to look for information that you are specifically interested in. It is also interesting um, way to see which parts of the game were based on real life information and sources. The thing is that it isn't different from normal ways of gathering information about the time period, and there's still a lot of reading which doesn't really help to make it more interactive, but it can still be used for school purposes to make it a little bit more exciting for the students, because you can actually run around in the world to go to the next place where you can find information without being interrupted by normal circumstances that happen in the regular game.
Europa Universalis is the fourth game of its series and is a grand strategy game that lets the player control a nation from 1444 to 1820. The player can choose between more than 850 different countries, though some have to be formed by the player themselves. The objective of the game is to expand the power of their country by diplomacy, warfare, and managing their economy. The way in which the player wants to do this is completely up to them. Paradox, the game development studio, wants the game to feel realistic and aims to do this by hand of a large array of often complicated game mechanics. The game doesn't offer a true-to-life experience of what the early modern era would have been like for the rulers of specific countries, since the players themselves can choose if they want to keep their game historically correct, or if they want to take a different path. The aim of the game is rather to try to present the player with the same options an early modern ruler would have had in an immersive manner, and not to give lessons in history. Furthermore, on the basis of specific events, the player does get to know about historic occurrences. If you're playing as the Netherlands, for example, you can get an event named Tulip Mania, referencing the trade in tulips which came to be known as the first speculative bubble in history. This event will have a negative effect on the player's economy. There are events like these for a multitude of countries, religions, and cultures. They are also the most significant source of true historical information in the game. Apart from these events, there are also missions that force the player into a certain direction. Some of these are true to life. The Netherlands and Portugal, for example, have missions that will direct the player towards trade in the Far East. There are, however, other missions that are less historically accurate, but can still be based upon historic claims, for example, claims on Jerusalem, or that are based upon what-if scenarios, like French missions to further power in India or Russia. If you want to learn about history, playing Europa Universalis might not be the best way to start out. The game does, however, have didactic value in making players understand more about the intricacies of statehood in the early modern era. The game is, by the way, already being used in academic context, for example in the University of Antwerp.
Now we will look at a World War I shooter made by DICE, Battlefield 1, in which the historical accuracy is to be found mostly in the weapons and the places where they fought. It's a mainstream shooter, so there is a big importance on how the gameplay feels, and that's why they have many weapons that weren't actually used only at the very end of World War One, because otherwise there would not be enough diversity. This was especially the case with automatic weapons like the Automatico M1918 for the Italians and the MP18 used by the Germans, which were guns only used really at the very end of World War One. Also, because every gun is part of a certain class in the game, you can use a gun even when you're technically playing with a country that doesn't use that specific gun. Also, another interesting part about Battlefield 1 and its multiplayer options is the game mode operations, which tries to make it like you're defending your front line or trying to win ground. It's not realistic in the sense that World War One was a war of trenches and people didn't run around so openly, but it is great in giving you that feeling of trying to win ground or defending it with all your might. Another way it tries to immerse you is by giving some information about what happened in the region you are fighting when the battle is over. It is also a great game by creating a sense of chaos and also tries not to only gratify a war. For example, when someone throws a grenade at you, the person you're playing starts screaming and really fearing for his life. It's a great way to show how many of the soldiers would have felt it during this time. Then you also have another important part of the Battlefield 1 game is the campaign, which is really well done with an intro where you start as a soldier, and when you die, they give you his name, and then they give you control of a different person on the battlefield. Um, it's amazingly done because it really lets you know that many people were unlucky and that the war could be could be the end for anybody. Then there are also other missions which are kind of based on the truth, and this is an example of this is the mission with Lawrence of Arabia and destroying the armored train. But for the most parts, the historical accuracy is to be found in the guns, the tanks, and the places which the battles take place.
Okay, and then last but not least, Hold Fast. Hold Fast is a multiplayer shooter and is the only title of the rather small studio of Anvil Game Studios. The game is set during the Napoleonic era of warfare. Since it is strictly a multiplayer game, it doesn't have an actual storyline to tell a story about the past. The historical value therefore lies rather in recreating the experience of a soldier in the average line battle during the Napoleonic Wars. It brings a time period to life in the many different uniforms of the time. Whilst the gameplay does feel authentic with horribly inaccurate muskets that do take some time to reload after each shot, historical accuracy has been somewhat abandoned still to make the game more enjoyable. For example, those reload times, whilst still long, are still significantly shorter than in real life. Another example, the smoke that comes out of the muskets disappears relatively fast as to not keep players blind for the rest of the match. The most fun experience is to be had in the line battle events hosted and closely moderated by the game developers. During this event, the players are forced to play in actual lines and follow the orders of their commanding officer. This makes for a well-organized cooperation that is rare in multiplayer games. Whilst this can make the game feel more realistic in some instances, it can become a cesspool of people screaming, insults, and blasting music in other instances. So now we'll talk about how important then it is that games are historically accurate. So to answer this question, we have to look at some of the pros and cons. First of all, I will list some of the benefits of historical accuracy. A lot of historical events have been glorified in the past and would be frowned upon today. Apart from that, a lot of these events that are by certain people considered ethically wrong are still celebrated by other people. When game producers alter the story to fit their values, they can make a lot of people mad about it. While the alterations might be less severe in some cases, they might be more universally rejected in other cases. Simply showing a story the way it happened would be an easy way to deal with controversy because it doesn't force any ethics on anyone and also doesn't show the maker's opinion of it, since he is staying neutral by not altering anything. To list a few examples, in Battlefield 5 there was a lot of commotion in the community about women and cosmetic items being implemented in a game about World War II. The game developers have replied to this criticism by saying that they want the game to feel inclusive towards their female audience. A lot of criticism was therefore interpreted as sexism. Whilst this is probable for a part of the audience, it doesn't explain the problems people had with the amount of unrealistic cosmetic items that were available to people. In the end, the way DICE and EA handled the entire situation did cause the game to underperform. Another aspect is immersion. People might be deterred by unrealistic stories. For some players, realism is a very important thing to make the game enjoyable. And to cater to these people, many simulation games have been made that offer people a true-to-life experience. When it comes to games set in a historical background, history is often only used as a background and altered in function of the gameplay. This might break the immersion for people who want an experience that feels authentic. For some people, the fun of a game lies in being able to recreate the past as it would have happened. Hold Fast, for example, tries to give an immersive experience to its players whilst keeping the game enjoyable. Whilst the immersion can be ruined by people blasting their music through their mics, this can also be easily avoided by muting those players. In this way, Hold Fast gives people the option to play however they like. Apart from that, people might get wrong ideas by history being implemented in the wrong way. If people believe that the game producers are telling the truth, then they will take fiction for fact. This might become a bigger problem when the game tries to show a lot of things like they actually were and tells a story that actually happened, but alters things to make the experience more enjoyable. This way, it can become unclear what is still fact and what is actually fiction. Some grand strategy games, like Universalis for example, have a lot of information about the past in their games, and people could learn a lot of things about what actually happened in the past. It can, however, be problematic when there are both events about historical occurrences that explain a certain history and other events that are entirely fictional. The problem is especially big if these games don't make the distinction between these events clear.
So now I will give some reasons why video games aren't meant to be historically accurate. One of the first reasons why is on the gameplay side, it's just not possible to make a game super realistic because it would just not be fun enough to play. You have this especially in open world games, like for example Odyssey, where the combat is just not realistic. For one, you need more than one hit to kill someone. The moveset that is used is also totally not comparable with how it was in real life. Furthermore, it uses some elements that came from movies like the movie 300 with the Spartan kick. Then you also have an arrow that you can shoot and move it yourself while it's in the air. This is all just done to make the gameplay more expansive and give you reasons to level up, to get all sorts of moves, and makes it feel like your character is getting stronger. Um, Another important element of many games is the story, especially in open world games, because this engages you to get further into the game together with the gameplay. It's a thing that decides the actions you will also undertake in those games. Most of the time, they only use an historical setting to create a world that's interesting. Maybe even a setting that's unexplored, so that the story has a place to fall back on. A beautiful world in a time that isn't ours. The story itself is mostly then built around a theme, which the world they've chosen leans perfectly too. This is why the makers of the games choose to take creative freedom with the historical period it places itself into to make a story they find interesting to tell. This also makes the game makes the game more personal for them, which helps to make the game also more interesting because they have made a story that they wanted to tell. This isn't the case when you look at strategy games like Europa Universalis 4. It's more the player itself that makes the story by the choices he makes in the game, and where the historical elements are to be found in how each state or country plays. Um, the starting point is actually an accurate portrayal of how it was, but after that, it's totally up to the player to make his own history and this can maybe give you a sense on how decisions could change how history went. This is all easier than just trying to tell a story that's completely based on the truth, because that would most of the time be too complicated. And in case of strategy games, it's just not the point of the game. An element that maybe isn't stressed enough that games games can give people the incentive to look up information about the history of the period where the game is placed. If you only look at how many articles, videos are made about how accurate a game is, then you know that people really like to know more about the period. If you look at Battlefield 1, there are many videos about the guns that are in the game, tanks. With Odyssey, it's more about the world and its architecture. Of course, also the Peloponnesian War, because wartime just generally interests people. Also, the fact that there are reaction videos of historians reacting to certain games shows the interest it can create, and that it also can create a debate about that period and creates new information because they highlight something that was not really paid attention to before. Strategy games, most of the time, are played by people with a certain interest of history, but still try to engage themselves with the history the game plays itself into. While more big mainstream games like Odyssey and Battlefield are played by many people that are not necessarily people with an affinity to history, but can because of these games be engaged with the interest of that with the history of that period and can therefore spark an interest after which they will search for more accurate information. It is also not really necessary for games to be historically accurate because the main focus of a video game is to make it fun, and therefore it isn't really looking to make a game that is foolproof against historical mistakes. You are there to enjoy the game, not specifically to learn about history and its nuances. Still, with many games that are placed in a historical setting, they want you to feel immersed and engaged with the world, and the best way is to make a world that is accurate but a little bit romanticized. Also, in the most story based games, they have collectibles that many times have extra information about elements specific to that period, even though they don't actually have to do that. Video games are there to have the people to have fun. So it's a choice of the developers to choose what they want to do with the game and what they find important. So people can always find a game that is more suited to what they want.
Our guest speaker, Sandra, is a hardcore gamer that doesn't have a history background but has played a lot of games that feature historical settings. So, why do you play games that have an historic setting?
Personally, I find games based in historical settings more enjoyable as they are more immersive. These games are more often grounded in reality as opposed to science fiction games or other fantasy games. Knowing the events or actions portrayed in these games happened or could have happened adds to the story and gives the sensation of reliving history. This, of course, doesn't mean I don't enjoy playing other games, such as racing games or games featuring more recent historic events. As these games are portraying more recent events, I am more aware of the events they are portraying, as such, meaning they offer less new content. Still, as someone who doesn't have an extensive knowledge of history, apart from what I have been taught in high school, most of the time I am still informed about the events portrayed in the historical games, be it World War I or events from other historical periods.
Okay, and how important is it then for you that the game is historically accurate?
For me, the most important thing in a video game is the gameplay. If there have to be some historical inaccuracies to improve gameplay, I'll gladly accept this.
And has playing a game ever given you the incentive to look up certain histories?
Yes, definitely. I love learning more about the games I'm playing, as I find having a better understanding of the game world helps me with the immersiveness of the game. I also enjoy watching documentaries or watching movies portraying the events of these games.
Okay, very good. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so in conclusion, the aim of a game is usually to make it enjoyable for the player. For some players, this will mean historical accuracy. For others, this will be less important. Apart from that, the question is if historical accuracy is even attainable. There will always be details that are omitted because they are deemed unimportant by developers towards a broader story. In any case, games are not academic sources to learn about history that is being told in the game. No one will expect games to be anything else than entertainment. If people want reliable information about the past, they should look into academic sources. Games can, however, be of great benefit to incentivize people to do so.
Everyone who made it to the end, thank you for watching. Please leave a comment to share your thoughts about this video and don't forget to like since it helps us out a lot. Please do share this video with others if you did find it interesting and we'll see you all later.